I'm John and I'm an alcoholic. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous on or about April 17th, 1986. I have a little over 10,000 days of sobriety, and of course during that sobriety you have a lot of stories. Now I first came into AA in Somers, Connecticut. Somers is a small town right on the border between Connecticut and Massachusetts. And I had my home group was in Somers. And there was, I used to go there frequently. And one of the things I noticed, there was a fellow named Steve. Now in AA we're all inclusive. I have young friends, I have old friends, I have friends of all ages and sizes and descriptions, because we're all inclusive. And there was a young man there, his name was Steve. Now Steve had been in an auto accident and had suffered from a brain injury. And I met him that very first time I went to the Somers Club. And I liked him. He had a nice smile. He had a little bit of a gimp, but I could see that he was busy helping others. And I saw the first night that I saw him, he was putting up tables and putting ashtrays down. At that time, he could smoke in AA, and he was just busy helping people. And I kind of liked that about him, and so I went to talk to him. Now, Steve had a deep speech impediment, and so he couldn't talk very quickly, nor could he talk clearly. And I can remember when I first met him, I kind of dreaded if he had to read any of the prayers or anything for AA because it would take him so long. And it would always be the same story. He'd say things like, my name is Steve and I'm an alcoholic. And then he would describe his story, and it was always the same story. He got drunk, he got picked up, they took him to jail, and he had 4 pairs of socks on. And then everybody would laugh, and it was a pretty simple story, and he told it over and over again to the point that I got a little bit bored with it. But he was a good man, and he seemed to be helping a lot of people. But it's amazing how someone young and with a mental problem from that accident, how they can teach you. And here's what Steve taught me. I saw him busy all the time helping others and helping at the club. And then one day I was coming back from working downtown in Hartford, and I was out in the countryside near a town called Ellington. We used to call it Smellington because they had all those cows. You could smell all the cow manure when you went by. And I saw Steve hitchhiking the other way. And I thought, what in the world is he doing in the middle of nowhere, hitchhiking? He was going in the opposite direction. So I didn't stop and pick him up, but the next time I saw him at a meeting, I said, Steve, what were you doing in the middle of nowhere out there in Ellington? And he said, I was going to a meeting. I said, going to a meeting? I said, you're in the middle of nowhere. I said, what meeting were you going to? He says, I was going to the Pathfinder Club in Manchester. I said, well, that's about 10 miles away. He says, well, that's why I left early. I thought, unbelievable. He would go to any length to go to a meeting. He was willing to walk 10 miles. I was impressed. And later on, I got to see him do other things. And I can remember one day, here's a guy, 23 years old, can hardly speak, and he's going to create a new meeting. It was going to be a step meeting in the middle of absolutely nowhere. In fact, I went to check out the place. It was an old church up in the low hills of Somers, Connecticut, in a church that had to be at least 200 years old. And he was going to have it in the basement. I go down in the basement, it's damp, it's dingy, it's got moss all over, it's got cobwebs, it's got a dirt floor, nothing but stone. And I thought, no way, this meeting is never going to work. So anyways, I thought I'd go there anyway. So I went there, and you know what? That meeting was full. And that meeting was full thereafter. Here he is, a young guy, and he did it all on his own, and I didn't even have the guts to think about starting a meeting, and he went ahead and did it. One day I was at the meeting, and I saw Steve. He was walking around with one of those VHS tapes in his back pocket. And I said, Steve, what's on the tape? Because at that time, VHS machines cost about $1,000. Very expensive. I didn't own one yet, and I was thinking about buying one, but they were still too expensive. He says, it's blank. And I says, it's blank. I says, how come you got it in your back pocket? He says, well, someday I'm going to get me a machine. That was hope. This kid had so much hope, I couldn't believe it. He had nothing. He lived in a rented room. He couldn't drive. He lived on Social Security. He never had any extra money. And yet, look what he did. And he had a great message of hope. Now, that's my story about Steve, and that's one of my favorites.